Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing
Oh my
here?
God.
Hey,
Julian, always nice to see you. We have a guest here, Tim, the founder CEO of Super Teacher. Welcome.
thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for being here, dude. I heard your product is amazing.
I think I recognized your mug.
Yeah, it's just you and me, Tim. That's it.
That's the Ember, right?
Yeah,
It is the Ember.
I
It's
feel like
perfect for me. Yeah.
I love it. I feel like more and more I notice people, I'll just be
Mhm.
meeting with somebody and they'll drink. It's like, hey, we have the same mug. I feel like it works.
Yeah.
It's like
It's
I
the
think
opposite for me. I have teammates and they're like, they literally leave it behind, on their desk and don't use it at all. They're like, I've never used it, not even a single time. But for people like us who want our coffee at exactly 55 degrees Celsius, that's the type of person. And so, we heard about Super Teacher, and we heard that it is amazing as a product. And I'm not sure if that's from a parent perspective or from a kid perspective, or maybe even both. Is it all? First of all, give us the intro to the product and
Yeah.
intro to you. Is it all homeschooling or is it partially homeschooling? Tell us the whole thing.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, so Super Teacher offers unlimited tutoring for $10 a month. And that's unlimited tutoring in reading, math, art, poetry, science, social emotional skills, geography, Greek mythology. Unlimited tutoring in any subject for all your children combined for $10 a month. It's for children ages 3 to 8 right now. And that's the sort of value proposition for Super Teacher. The idea is instead of paying maybe $1,000 a month for a tutor, which very few people can afford, here this is the price, almost of a Happy Meal. Almost everybody can afford to spend $10 a month, especially when what you're getting is you'll be able to have your child catch up in any subject they might be struggling with, or get ahead if that's your goal as a parent, is to get your child a few grades ahead. And yeah, it really works. It's out on the App Store. It's free to download. It's free to try. The first lesson in every course is free. We've already got about 12,000 families that have subscribed for the paid full version. Got great retention, and actually a lot of our subscriptions now are people who are resubscribing after canceling them for a little while. They realize they wanted it again. And as for homeschool versus not homeschool, it's a mix. We certainly have a lot of traction within the homeschool community. But
Yep.
we see our activity spike in the afternoons during the weekdays, and so we suspect that we also have a lot of traction. Probably the majority of our traction with families where the children are
Right.
at school during the days.
Right. Take us through your entrepreneurial journey, because I know you had a previous company that you sold to Google
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, so my previous company, that's an elevator pitch I haven't given for a long time.
All right,
But,
let's hear it.
I don't even remember how. Well, the original pitch was that we were going to turn 3 phones into a 3-camera studio. So you want to record maybe your child's piano recital or whatever it might be. You hit
Yeah.
record on one device and they all start recording. You hit stop and they all stop, and it synchronizes the videos using timestamps. And then you edit like a TV producer, saying like cut to camera 2, cut to camera 3. So it makes the process of making a multi-angle video easy, intuitive, and fun. And that was the original pitch. It was a terrible idea for a product.
It didn't work.
It
'Cause-
worked. No,
yeah.
the product worked. The technology was pretty impressive, but it's just a very limited, set of
Right.
situations where you actually want to capture a multi-angle video, especially from a consumer standpoint. For television and high production stuff, they're going to use much better cameras than what was at the time the iPhone 5 or something like that.
Right.
And this was very, very early in the days of mobile video. Almost nobody was even recording any video whatsoever. This was when Instagram hadn't even yet been sold. Pinterest was new. This was started in 2012. We
Right.
ended up pivoting to being general video editing tools for the App Store. We were some of the first and the best mobile video editing apps. We were one of Apple's best apps of 2014. We were one of Starbucks' apps of the week. We were, pre-installed on the Apple retail store demo devices. So you go into an
Oh,
Apple store,
cool.
pick up an iPad, demo device, our app was running on it. And it ended up being basically meat and potatoes video editing on a mobile device. We were the first ones to kind of figure out how to do that efficiently. It was possible for the first time. Also, that was actually a pretty great idea for a product in a category.
Right.
It exists. but it was a little bit too early. We ended up being acquired by Google Photos and becoming the
I
video team at Google Photos.
I'm so curious about what prompts someone, because what sounds like a good idea to a first-time founder is totally different than what
Yes.
sounds like a good idea for a second-time founder.
Yeah.
Also, you know that a lot of the learning is in the process as a second-time founder.
Yeah.
You kind of obsess over the idea a little bit. I think if I ever started even another company after my second venture-backed one, I would probably obsess over the idea more again.
Yeah.
So how do you go from, mobile photo editing, try to get the right kind of traction, trying to get your company to really be successful,
Yeah.
to something like $10 tutoring a month, right? And so, like, walk me through that process.
That's a good question. There was certainly a lot of pressure from people to be like, "Why don't you go do another thing in video editing, mobile
course.
video?"
Yeah.
I think that's often the case. I think I was able to get around that because the reality of the first company, although I would often find a way to tie what I was doing to the rest of my life. Like my whole life has been leading up to making like a mobile video editing
Right.
startup. The reality is that that story was pretty tortured. And my kind of real life story is I grew up as the parent of the child of teachers. My parents were teachers. My grandparent was a teacher.
Got it.
My wife is a teacher. My daughter wants to be a teacher. I've got
Wow.
teachers all over. I could go on and on. It's just sort of like a teaching family. I became a teacher out of college. I joined the New York City Teaching Fellows, taught in the New York City public school system, and very enjoyably. And then went to grad school and as a hobby made educational apps. And then at the end of grad school, I kind of fell ass backwards into making a mobile video editing startup. And that sort of took off. It was, it sounds almost insane to say now, but when I started it, I sort of thought of it as like, this is my kind of like trial run with the startup. Surely it's not going to work. And then I'll do something with education. And then we got, traction in terms of getting, co-founders and then some investment and then some being featured here and there. Eventually acquired by Google, sort of changed the trajectory of my own life. It was a, neat and, entry into the tech industry.
Right.
But for me, doing Super Teacher is more like, okay, I'm comfortable financially. I can do whatever I want with the rest of my life now. What is it that I really want to do? And after a little bit of introspection, it became pretty obvious. I want to go back into education, want to go back into doing consumer stuff. I was doing some AI infrastructure thing at Google. I was running a product called Google Colab.
Yep.
And I sort of had this epiphany that, first of all, I should pick something that I really want to work on, like that I'll be happy to be still working on when I'm 65. And my children were like 2 and 4 at the time. And I had this sort of other epiphany that I wanted to work on something that I could work on with my kids.
Right.
Like I knew I would become obsessed with work again, obsessed with, the startup. I'd be kind of living that hashtag startup life. And if I'm doing something in AI infrastructure, and I had like offers for term sheets to do something in enterprise AI infrastructure, it's like, how do I explain that to my 4-year-old, to my 5, they're just not going to care. And so that was another part of it. I just wanted to be building something where my work life and kind of living my life with my kids was all the same. So for me, the how did I get from mobile video to doing something in education is more like, why was I doing something in mobile video in the first place?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
education is really where my passion has always been. That's what my dissertation is about from grad school. My wife is a teacher. We met when we were colleagues. And I love teaching. I love education. And it was a very natural fit. Once I realized maybe I could do this, it was impossible to get my mind off of the idea of doing this.
Right. Did you so for your first company, I think it says that you raised a few rounds of funding
Rounds,
for
yeah.
that. Yeah, I'm assuming just kind of based on how many people you have working there now, you haven't taken any funding, and maybe that's wrong.
Oh no, for
For
Super Teacher?
Yeah.
Oh no, we have.
Oh, you have. Oh, got it.
Oh yeah. No, we've raised. Well, we haven't announced it publicly, but
Okay.
we've raised millions of dollars,
Got it.
and we have a staff of 10 people. We've been working for a few years now,
Got it. Got it.
two,
Um,
2.5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that something that you want to work on until you're like 65. Does that like change the way you think about like funding or building a team, or like how big and fast you want to grow this? And like, do you have to get different investors potentially on board earlier on than like the traditional like
Yeah.
VC billion-dollar company IPO kind of
It-
treadmill?
It's a good question. And you guys must have some thoughts on this too about, I think every VC funded founder does think like, what if I did this without VC funding the second time?
Yeah. Mhm.
There's kind of less constraints. With respect to, my own point of view on it, I think like every second time founder, I do think it'd be cool to one day try to bootstrap and
Yeah.
go totally solo. That's interesting. You kind of have all the freedom to do, whatever you want at whatever time scale. Different VCs have different timescales that they think and operate at, but for the most part, my point of view is once you take VC funding, you're kind of attaching yourself to a certain
Yep.
way of growing the company, certain expectations that the people that join your team are joining a venture-backed company. It's that they also have expectations
Right.
Mhm.
as team members and as colleagues, and the investors have their expectations. I personally am taking a very patient approach, and not in a rush. It's not like let's put it all on the table, and if it doesn't work, we'll fold it up and do something else. I really want to make this work. Extremely dedicated to it. Sometimes they say, they, s- s- like startups don't end when you run out of money. The startup end when the founder gives up.
Yeah.
And this is something that like I would go long after running out of money if that ever happened. This feels like my life calling, and it feels very, very natural. I think everybody around me, including my wife who knows me better than anybody, can recognize that I feel like I finally am exactly where I want to be. But the expectations are still that you have to try to find hockey stick growth, that you've got to,
Yeah.
be going for, a triple, double, double, double.
For sure.
You need to
Yeah.
grow fast. And so
And
that comes from, the funding. And I knew what I was signing up for,
Right. Right.
how does somebody who's a founder decide between, because this relentlessness that you're talking about of I can keep working with like this until I'm 60, working on this until I'm 65. It's not an issue of money. There is a bit of financial freedom that I have obtained in the past, and the result is I have this freedom to make a choice, right? So there's two angles to that. One is you're always opting in. It's always a choice because you don't have to do it, right?
Mhm.
And the second option is choosing to do it means that every day you are like, I'm opting into this. So how does a founder decide when something is working? Because even if you were in the education space, you could do 100 ideas in the education space. You could even do
Yeah.
100 ideas in B2C in the education
Yeah.
space. And you could figure out this was the one, even
Yeah.
though you had kids.
Yeah.
Try to separate yourself from the
Yeah.
personal element. Say, how does the founder decide that something is continuously worth pursuing?
Yeah, it's a good question because at first, you start, it's like a blank slate and you haven't launched anything. So clearly you're not a product market fit yet, right? And, as you proceed, you might see traction with beta testers. You launch an early version. You see that, there are kids, in our case, you see kids that are taking hundreds of lessons in Super Teacher. We've got some crazy kid out there who's taking over 1,000 lessons in Super Teacher, but that's still not it. That's not a business yet. You're looking at your unit economics. I think it's really like any other business. When you have reached product market fit. And I like to remind my team that we actually are not there yet. We have a product that's working very well. It's incredibly effective, teaching kids how to read, math, draw, all those things. But we haven't yet figured out like rocket ship distribution. We have positive unit economics, but they're not very positive. So we're still kind of on there. I don't think there's anything special about evaluating where we are as a startup because of my own point of view of how far I will go. I feel like, I don't know what it would take for me to stop on this mission, but I don't even think about it. For, day to day, it's like I'm going all in to try to make this work. And there's a lot of, we've knocked down a lot of hurdles along the way, and now have a product that's somewhat working. And I don't even think about like, am I opting in another day? I think you'd really have to see some sort of trying to think what would get me to stop. Like, what would actually? That's a good question. What would actually get me to stop working on this? I mean, I
Well,
think
I mean, because if you turn it into a third party, and as I'm talking about about the situation, it's kind of like you're telling me you have kids with 1,000 lessons
yeah,
in Super Teacher, and
yeah,
I'm almost like, but what if you could have usage-based pricing? Immediately a VC would think this, right? Which is like, if you have 1,000 kid doing
oh,
1,000,
we have one kid who is over.
even so,
Yeah, it's true. We've got a like the people
yeah,
who are really using Super Teacher very heavily are getting a value out of Super Teacher that is totally
right.
incommensurate with the
Right.
price that they're paying. It is
There
an
it-
odd feature.
You have an inherent
Yeah,
word of mouth, just in the product value. At Breather, my last company, there was an inherent product value that we very much started at the early. They were like, you
Yeah.
rent a space, you rent it for an hour, $20, and it was in New York City,
Mhm.
and it was just like that was so radically cheap that it was worth talking about. So your thing
Yeah.
has the same radical cheapness. I'm wondering if it's the primary go to market is really just the
Yeah.
fact that it's cheap and students and parents talk to one another.
Yes. Now that is, initially it was running ads. So to get the word out, we were just running ads. And
Got
we saw it's interesting, we saw our CAC, our customer acquisition costs going down over time. Now that's the exact opposite of what you normally expect. When you start running ads, once you've gotten all the kind of like early adopters and the people who are desperately looking for a product like yours, the cost of acquisition normally goes up over time. And so we thought that was a little weird. So we started running surveys. So for every 100% of subscribers, we would ask them, hey, where did you hear about the app? And, a couple follow-up questions. And, naively, before running the surveys, our assumption was simply 100% of our subscribers are coming in through ads. It turned out it was only 50% of our subscribers were coming in through ads. 50% were coming in through word of mouth.
Right.
And the biggest vector was basically people saying, oh, I heard about the app from my child's teacher.
Right.
And yeah, that's true. I don't think as a former teacher, I just don't think any teacher would be recommending to their students as parents an app that was like $100 a month.
Right.
It's just like you don't even know where the parents are economically. So yeah, this is an element of the conversation worthiness, the price point. Although I guess I like to think that there's something even more obvious in terms of why it's worth talking about, which is that it works at all.
Right.
Like that that there is an AI tutor that is actually capable of teaching children to read now. My children my older daughters learned multiplication, division, fractions entirely from Super Teacher. She's not up to it at school yet. My wife and I, even though she's a math teacher, I'm a former math teacher, we deliberately don't actually teach them anything. We just let Super Teacher do it. And it's like, wow, this stuff actually works. And so there's, I'd like to think that people might be talking about it just based on the fact that it works, even if you ignore the price.
This is a high-risk experiment you are running. Because if it is not working, your kids will not end up in a good place. But you must have a conviction.
Yeah.
You're watching it day to day.
Yeah, that's right. And it is pretty obvious when you see your kid. I mean, like, just to give you an example, like a typical use case, maybe one of the most common use cases in Super Teacher would be that a parent wants their child to start learning how to read. Maybe they're not happy with the fact that their pre-K or kindergarten hasn't taught reading yet. Or maybe they've noticed that like they go into parent-teacher conferences, they hear that there's all these other kids reading and they see some other kids reading and then their child doesn't read at all yet. They only know the sounds of the letters of the alphabet. So you can take a course in Super Teacher called Learn to Read. And it starts out teaching phonics-based, how to sound out 3-letter words like bat, cat, rat, sat, and then one sight word, the, like how do you recognize it? And by the end of the first lesson, the typical student, like the vast majority of children are learning how to sound out words for the very first time at the beginning of the lesson. We show them some words, they don't know how to read any of them. And at the end, they're reading little sentences like, the cat sat, the rat sat. And we hear literally people saying, my child was jumping up and down on the couch saying, I can read after one lesson. And so it's just incredibly obvious that your child is learning. The evidence is really there. It is in a sense that high-risk experiment where it's like, okay, we're putting this app out there. And if it doesn't work, obviously, people are not going to subscribe. That's one of the reasons why we made it free to download and free to try.
Right.
First of all, we wanted everybody to be able to try it for free. We wanted it to be very sort of accessible. We're kind of mission-driven company. But I actually set that business model like years before we launched, or, like at the outset, 2 years before we launched, because I wanted the whole team to know that this product is going to rest on its actual ability to teach kids. And it has to be so good that when a parent has tried it with their kid, they see it working with me, even like a few lessons, and they're like, this is so good, I'm going to start paying.
How did you how did you start thinking about or change your thinking about distribution from your first company to now your second company, which you can definitely
That's a great question.
argue
I mean,
you're kind of
I'm still in
yeah
the process of changing my mind about distribution.
yeah
I think that with our first app, we had a model that was, I'm talking about like my previous startup, Fly
yes
Labs, it was called.
yeah
And we had a model that was typical with creative tools. I think it was pioneered by a great app called Paper by 53, where you had a bunch of additional sort of tools you can use in your creative tool. Like in that case, it was a drawing thing, and they had like, you can buy a brush, a pencil,
yeah
or you could buy the essentials package for like $7.99. That's a typical price point at the time. And we did the same model. We had a few specific features you could pay for. They were like $2 a piece, and then you
right
could get the whole essentials package with all of them for like $7, $8. And boy, we had the stupidest way of just getting distributed. I mean, it was kind of cool. Apple would feature us all the time on the App Store. We were featured
right
#1 globally across all categories, and repeatedly many times in the photo video category, which at the time was a very good way of getting, hundreds of thousands of downloads. Problem with that is every VC, when you go out and you say like, this is our method of
yeah
distribution, Apple keeps featuring us, they're like, well, what would you do if Apple stopped featuring you? And we didn't really have any kind of good answer to that whatsoever. In a weird way, we fell into this trap where the company was basically a factory that created new features, where the goal was partly for the end user, but partly so that Apple would feature us because we were launching this
right
new feature. Often the inspiration was that it used the latest hardware or stuff from the latest OS that Apple wanted to feature. We were very good at running that playbook for getting featured by Apple. And we couldn't run ads because, there's no way you're going to have a customer acquisition cost that's less than $8,
right
which
right
was the lifetime value of a customer. So here, the thinking was, we're going to create value that would otherwise cost you like $100 to $1,000 a month in terms
right
of like paying a tutor or paying tutors, and it's going to charge $10 a month. So the value proposition was very obvious for the user, and it was $10 a month. So ideally, this is something that people end up subscribing to in perpetuity. The way I think about it is Super Teacher should be like a semi-mandatory subscription for parents, the way like every parent has a subscription to Disney Plus. Every
right
parent should also have a
right
subscription to Super Teacher. Like, why wouldn't you get your child private one-on-one lessons in every subject that they're ever going to face? And because it's $10 a month, and the idea is long-term subscriptions, you've got a lifetime value that can be in the hundreds of dollars, and that can, be like a 3 to 6x multiple over what you typically might see for a customer acquisition cost for something at this price point on the mobile app store. So
I'm immediately like, but if you only offer annual, then the result will be your average LTV. Like, I'm doing the economic. You didn't do this. You just said, let's offer value, right? Which is so pure and naive. Not naive, really.
Yeah,
But just like not hardened.
I'm rolling like a first-time founder here.
yeah Julian, you're thinking like the third time
No,
back
you're not
venture
wrong, Julian.
founder.
You're not wrong. We could make more money quickly if we raise the price or only offer the annual plan. We actually, we know this. We've done enough work to understand that would work. And what can I say about this? I feel like there's an investor angle that's really fun to talk about, and then I think there's a maybe like a second time founder angle to why I'm actually doing what I'm doing.
Yes.
With pricing. I think the investor angle is fun to talk about because there are investors who say pretty much exactly what you're saying, Julian, and you're not going to be surprised that they say, why aren't you raising the price? Can't you get more out of your power users? Are you letting people do hundreds of lessons over months, like this is, you're not charging them enough money. And what if you made it like $19.99 a month, or yeah, you charge per course or per lesson or some sort of usage-based pricing? Have you experimented with this? Maybe you could like sell, premium versions of it that have, like extra features or what have you. And that's actually very typical of a certain type of investor. I stereotype it as like East Coast style investors, but it's that's not fair. But
I love
I don't know
that.
how much experience you guys have like fundraising on the East Coast versus the West Coast, but
Yes. Both.
sounds like you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they're not wrong. That's a very solid way to kind of build a business. It's a bit kind of like MBA driven. It's like a spreadsheet. You're selling widgets. We don't really care what you're selling if you experimented with trying to make more money faster,
Yeah.
Just to throw the other alternative, somebody introduced me. I was in San Francisco just for a meeting, and a friend of mine was like, "Yeah, you should meet my friend. He's like one of the first first 10 Googlers or something. He's really passionate about education, and he does some angel investing."
Yeah.
And so he introduced me, like on text, and is like, "Why don't you meet me at the Coupa Cafe tomorrow in Palo Alto if you're around?" It's like, "Yeah, great. We'll grab a coffee." And for context, this guy's like a former computer science professor. We first started talking about my dissertation, and we were talking about like considering an infinite sequence, A sub k, B sub k,
Yes.
and he was following it all, and thought that's pretty interesting, interesting research. And he had tried Super Teacher the night before with his child, and halfway through the coffee, first of all, he was like, I'm in. I'll put in $250K of my own like personal money. And like after the meeting, he was just like, "Yeah, send me the paperwork, send me the wiring instructions." Like he was just like ready to go, slinging money in. We barely talked at all about. Well, we didn't talk at all. I mean, we talked a little bit about revenue, but the main thing that came out of that conversation when we were talking about revenue was, "Tim, the only thing I don't understand. My big suggestion for you would be stop charging." Stop charging anything. Why are you charging? You have no idea how fast you could grow because there's this hurdle that every user comes across where they have to pay $10 a month. Why not just make it free? See if you can. Wouldn't it be cool to like educate like 1 billion people? Like and I was like, yes, that would be cool. That's totally like how that would be awesome. And like the dichotomy right there, like between East Coast style and like all right, that's maybe like kind of extreme on the West Coast style, but like make it free, grow as fast as you can. Really, like he was really much bought into the technical strength of the our technical strategy, I would say.
Yeah.
And he had tried the product and been impressed. He knew that we were better than anything else that was out there. He'd been sort of looking at this space. So that's the kind of fun angle around pricing is like, well, one thing you can't do is just be like, listen to what do the investors say? Investors say completely different things.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things is when investors be like, well, I love when investors talk for the entire investment class. They're like, what VCs, we like to see blah, blah, blah. It's like, I was just talking to somebody else who literally says the exact opposite of what you're saying. But there's a lot of variation in the pricing schemes that investors have asked me about, put it that way. On the other thing on the like kind of like how I think about it is I can work on this forever, partly because I'm motivated by the mission. When I started my career, it was to join the New York City Teaching Fellows, which is it's kind of like Teach for America, but for the New York City public school system. Started my teaching career up in Harlem, a hard to staff school where they couldn't get enough math teachers. And the idea is to kind of level the educational playing field. And that's what was part of my kind of epiphany as a second time founder. I was like, why don't I do the thing that I always really, really wanted to do, which was this? And why don't I, as we go, kind of stick to this idea of making this a product that every family can afford. It's a little bit splitting the middle, hopefully not as like a half measure, but splitting the middle between like making it free, growing as fast as you can, and trying to extract as much money from like the market as possible, from like the customer market. And I don't think it's just me. I think that when I look at my team, a lot of them like what they're working on, partly because it's obviously good for the world.
Right.
you know.
Right.
And when we look at the people who are, they comment on our ads, we can kind of see who is using our product. We have very little information about our end users. We collect very little data because of regulations around children's PII and stuff. And but every indication we have, like the people email us for customer support, the people who comment on our ads, it's actually it's a huge spectrum, but there's a lot of people who are actually low income who definitely could never afford to pay for a tutor for their children. And that motivates me. I think it motivates a lot of the team. And I think that is a bit of it's like the opposite of the second time founder thing where you try to like focus on distribution and try to get as much money because you got to be real serious about the finances. You do. I don't want to say that that's not true, but there's also an element of sticking to the mission that you started with, picking a mission and knowing that that's going to keep you going through the hard times. It's going to keep a lot of the team going through the hard times. And it's just surprising how effective that is for me. I think it motivates people who work on Super Teacher. When I talk to other people, they're happy to beta test. They think it's great what we're doing. It's just something that's like very obviously kind of good. And you could somehow translate that into like economic benefit. It's like, well, we don't have to recruit as often because people, stay at Super Teacher much more often, much longer. We've never lost an engineer. You have the same UX designer from day one. The vast majority of our creators have been there, from the beginning. And that's, how hard it is to recruit, what a distraction it is to onboard new people, right? That's a cost. And that cost, you don't incur that cost when you have higher retention on your team. And that higher retention partly comes from sticking to the mission that kind of gets everybody excited in the first place. So that's kind of how I think about it. And for right now, I'm pretty happy with what we're doing. We will do a little bit experimenting with price, but probably a little bit in both directions, a nod to both types of investors that we have.
Can we actually go back to the last topic? I find that really intriguing, and I don't think a lot of people really realize it. The East Coast versus West Coast analogy, and just the U.S. Obviously, there's a lot of different areas. I would say like let's just like characterize like Silicon Valley as like a mindset. It's
really
like
Silicon Valley versus everywhere else is actually more accurate way to describe it.
But obviously there's other pockets like I don't know, and like LA has a certain set of investors that came from Silicon Valley and Miami and all this stuff, and obviously there are investors like that in New York as well.
That's true.
But
Absolutely.
just like that mentality of like, if this works, it's going to be massive, and we want to get there, and we want to like own everything, and so like let's remove all the obstacles to get as big as we possibly can. Let's not even worry about like if you have like some way to make money, or even there's a lot of companies that incur a lot of costs. Like OpenAI is a great example. Like they are very unprofitable right now. But it's all about growth and being the number one provider of that service, because the winner is going to hopefully take a lot of that, and then there's billions of dollars going into this industry. I definitely prefer working with those types of investors more, because that's the way that I think. But there's definitely on the other side of things, it's like, hey, we can make money faster, sooner, and those investors I seem to think they actually tend to like bow out over like the smallest minute piece in your pitch or something like that. It's like, well, I don't totally, it's like, we haven't even figured this out. It's like, we're still like creating the product and all this stuff. It's like, well, what happens if this goes wrong? Or I think you should be doing this and all of that. But there is a really big dichotomy between those different types of investors. I think that maybe like a third tier would be like Canada, and Julian knows this very well. Canadian investors. Oh yeah, they're terrible. They're terrible. They do not see the bigger picture at all. I've never actually taken any money from any like European investors or anything like that. But like, I think that like there was actually just a thread online on Twitter the other day ago that somebody's that was doing a Series A raise, and it was a hot round, and the two Silicon Valley VCs flew to London. This is a London-based company, and the London-based VCs actually didn't actually schedule the partner meeting for like a week or two later than that or something like that. And just
Yeah.
so it shows you like the hustle that people see is like if something's really working, like you just do whatever you can do to get into the deal. And
Yeah.
also you just empower the founders to go as fast as you can because
Yeah.
it really is like at the end of the day, it's power law business if you're
Yeah.
in venture.
It is. And realistically, the giant wins all come from the Silicon Valley style of investing. I mean, it
Yes,
is
totally.
made for creating and finding the giant wins. You know, you look at Facebook, Apple,
Yeah,
Google, Stripe. I mean, the big winners almost all have that type of mentality
totally.
around growth, around the founder and the VCs. Which isn't to say that the other investors. I do like to play like devil's advocate for
Totally.
the others, where it's like it's not like they're losing their LPs money or anything like that. They actually have lower risk, lower return. You know, they almost never create the Facebook sized outcomes
Right.
because that's how they're structured. They want to be seeing the EBITDA from very, very early on, you know.
So why isn't it free? Tell me why it's not free.
There we go.
Why Super Teacher's not free? That's a good question. We may experiment a little bit with that. We do have actual unit economics besides the CAC on the back end. In other words, it's not free to service a subscription. And so if we were just growing as fast as we could and just giving an unlimited amount of Super Teacher free to everybody, well, it's actually a good question. It would end up costing them.
He's literally going to change his mind at the end of this podcast. It's just okay.
It's now
Which is
free.
okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
we would have to like be honest with ourselves that we are funding usage. Like it's like for every you know, it's like if for every user you have, you're losing some money, you obviously cannot make that up in volume. You know,
Right.
so you can only hope to make that up, you know, eventually. And you do absolutely then need to have the types of investors who want to be seeing that type of growth. And it's not all like, I don't have the greatest amount of experience with this, but you know, sometimes you'll see a startup that like seems to have like struck gold. Like there was a startup I met at an event in San Francisco once, and they had made some sort of like AI app for consumers. Like maybe it's like one of those like image transfer things where, you know, you can make yourself look like a celebrity or
Oh yeah.
something
So many
like that.
ads.
Sure.
And they had gotten like 70 million users over the last like 3 months because they were just blowing up. Everybody kept on posting photos of themselves using this app on social media. This ain't a product that I had heard of. I can't remember the name of it anymore. But they weren't charging anything. It was just like this free thing everybody could get. And they were like burning through many millions of dollars in server costs because it was actual real AI inference on the back end.
Oh wow.
Because this is like cloud-based. And they were like, you know, barreling towards running out of money. I actually don't know if they made it through. I actually have no idea did they have to close up shop and did they end up putting a pricing order? But it is, you know, it is definitely not for the faint of heart, right? Where like your mode of success is like, yeah, man, this shit is blowing up. Actually, instead of 2 years of runway, it looks like we only have 6 more weeks of runway. Let's go find an investor who believes in it. And it doesn't always work out. I mean,
Do you guys have a similar?
I mean, like there are things that blow up and then evaporate.
Do you guys have a similar back-end infrastructure? Are you guys using OpenAI or any of those toolings or anything like that, or is it just all purely cloud?
We are very much like a cloud-oriented architecture. So the way it works is like the kid is like, it's almost like they're having a Zoom call with a virtual teacher in a cloud, in the cloud. In other words, like the teacher and the child are speaking. Every time the child speaks, the audio goes up into the cloud. We do this speech recognition. We do natural language processing. We synthesize the voice of the teacher responding as well as all the imagery, and that gets like kind of piped back down the Zoom connection. Use an open source thing called WebRTC behind the scenes, and so it is very much that type of architecture. We are very, very smart in keeping the costs down, despite the fact that we use a lot of AI in the sense of like neural network based technology in the
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's a de minimis cost per subscriber, but it's like on the order of it's not on the order of magnitude of like a penny per subscriber per month or something. It'll be more on the order of magnitude of like somewhere between 10 cents and $1 per subscriber per month.
Okay, that is if that's like 10% of the actual cost, that is not nothing. It's not
Yeah,
like your typical just
yeah,
server
and the
cost.
ones who are using, like hundreds and hundreds of lessons, I actually haven't done the calculation, but those people, it's possible that we're
Right.
actually losing money on them. But
So
making it free means we're going to have to shoulder
yeah,
all that cost
Julian,
for
you're
all
gonna
those
kill his
people.
company by making it go free.
I'm definitely not, for a couple reasons. One is we have tutoring clients in our organization, and then the second one is actually, it brings up a question, Tim. There are, because I know more about tutoring than maybe the average
But
person
are
in
you
the
actually also
industry.
with Winnie? I don't. Your
No.
organization is it Winnie?
No.
Is
Julian
my-
has his own company.
Winnie,
no.
Sarah Mouskoff's company.
No, I'm not with Winnie. No, that's a good question.
Company that
No,
also
no.
has tutors in its organization.
No, they do. Yeah. So we serve tutoring organizations on the infrastructure and operations and finance
Oh,
side.
really?
Yeah. And so the organizations tend to be a bunch of 1099s, right? All around a central bit of infrastructure. And I was going to ask you specifically around there are use cases where tutoring is useful, I think is what the case we want to make.
Yeah.
And some of the organizations that I serve that use our product and that we serve, it's like they have specific use cases. So, for example, test prep for an SAT prep, right? Ahead of an important test that's important.
Big one, maybe the biggest.
To get into a specific college.
Yeah.
Or any number of other things that practice ends up serving the tutoring organization for. Now, it's way more specific and way less general. So does Super Teacher start failing the more specific the use case? And does it start succeeding the more it's like learning to read, which is like a universal use case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the content in Super Teacher is crafted. It's not just like we're having kids talk to ChatGPT. A lot of people think that must be what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And even more people think that would be a great idea for making an AI tutor for children. That doesn't really work. Like, not out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be very visual for small children. So our lessons and our courses have images, GIFs, videos, flashcard sessions, worksheets that can be printed out. Kid does on paper later. It's a much more robust, comprehensive thing. And the content is, there's AI involved, including LLMs, but like it's largely created in advance. Okay.
Right.
And so what it's good for is whatever we have actually created. So it doesn't work for SAT prep at all because we've never created a course in SAT prep. Now, the underlying technology is totally agnostic to age and subject. In fact, Super Teacher taught a high school trigonometry class, actually in a classroom, like one-to-many once. And so it's totally capable of doing a SAT prep. From a technology perspective, we've never focused on that. Perhaps we should. As you point out, that's a big area for tutors, and parents really open up their wallets when they're like, shit, how am I to get an SAT? Might as well. It's almost seen as an investment for financial aid or to get into a better college, for when it gets high stakes testing and like AP calculus and stuff. Well, it does end up being a more crowded market. There's nothing to say that Super Teacher cannot serve those markets. And we're actually considering doing something like that. But today we only focus on the early elementary school age. So basically from pre-K to third grade, maybe fourth grade. I think within the next year, we'll be covering, fourth, fifth, maybe some sixth grade math.
It's like the most high stakes area also, and probably when the parent feels the most overwhelmed.
You talking about the high school, high stakes stuff?
No, your stuff. I think from 4 to 8, like those are critical learning.
Well, they are critical. So if you're going to do one thing for your kid, get them off to a good start with, reading and arithmetic. But, there could be like no better investment. Unfortunately, kind of for us from a business perspective, what the vast majority of parents, especially in the United States, do is they don't invest a lot to try to make sure their kids don't fall behind or even to try to get ahead at that age. They're just like, we're going to send the kid to the local public school and hopefully that's good enough. And then whatever happens, happens. And then like high school comes around, kid takes the PSAT,
Right.
and the parents are like, shit. I got to go find something to pay. No, but pay Kumon or Princeton Review or Kaplan or the tutoring organizations or, that type of thing. So it is more critical, I would say, for the young age in practice, but it's not how parents end up seeing it in the United States.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
sad.
unfortunately, we kind of have to, nudge people towards doing healthy behaviors that they're
Yeah.
not going to regret. But it's not an understood kind of spending category for a lot of parents.
Do you see that certain geos like per whatever 100,000 people that sign up more for your product? Like I find my background, I grew up in Canada. I was in like not like lower income. I consider myself in like public school, and like I didn't have like it would probably be like the average. And now we're raising our kids in the Bay Area, and you have like there's these tutors, and even like my oldest is 6 years old, and like everybody's getting tutors, and like it's
Yeah.
crazy and all this stuff. And do you see that difference between like maybe it's like in like certain income ranges or something like that around the country or
Yeah. It's definitely true that at the younger ages, not the only, but the parents that are spending a lot of money on their children's education at like the 6-year-old level,
yeah,
on supplementary, forget it, private schools obviously is a whole other category, but like
right,
even just
right,
supplemental education beyond the local public school, it will end up being relatively well off, highly educated parents.
right,
Um, that's definitely true. I think there's an even bigger difference. We were only available in the United States, but I've heard anecdotally from people that have run global education products that there's a huge difference between the United States and other parts of the world, especially Asia, around
huh,
the desire to spend kind of disposable income on your child's education at those young ages.
right,
And so, for example, we have a couple of investors from India, one of whom ran a public education company, and he was like, it's very different in India. He's from India. He's like, from the very beginning, parents, there's no like, well, we'll let the school deal with it. It's like, I'm going to
right,
be extremely
right,
involved in my parents' education. I'm going to be buying extra worksheets. I'm going to be putting them in front of educational, videos. I'm going to be involved, looking at their homework with them. I'll be having them do more than the school even covers, and that this is extremely common. And so it's funny, the thing that you're describing that we said, oh, all right, well, that's typical in the Bay Area, affluent, highly educated
right,
area, but it's also common in Asia in general, including India and East Asia. I have heard anecdotally, again, we haven't seen that ourselves at Super Teacher because we have not launched in any country besides the United States yet, but that's one of the things we're looking into is launching in all those other countries,
yeah,
especially the English-speaking countries where we can very easily just
yeah.
kind of launch without worrying about like
Jul-
translation,
Ju-
localization.
Julian, I'm curious on your experience in the Canadian education system, and did you have supplemental stuff? Where did you grow up again?
I grew up
What?
in French Canada, and I went to school in
Okay,
French, right,
right,
which is
right,
the other part, right? And
yeah,
so, but what occurs to me is that that thing like Super Teacher could very easily teach people English for the first time,
right,
right? And so in reality, there's lots of people, for example, whose primary language is Mandarin,
Yeah.
to give you a sense, but who just themselves on their own just want to learn English and learn to read English, for example, for which
Yeah.
something like this is pretty generalized. And, but yeah, I'm in an unusual case because I learned both languages.
right,
Yeah, like the system, what I notice from tutoring organizations that I talk to is definitely that it is harder to get people to pay, not our customers, but their customers, tutoring or customers in the United States versus where education is probably more respected, all
right.
things being considered, for example, in the United Kingdom, in India, or in other places like that.
Huh. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very interesting. There's definitely some targeting you could do here on the App Store, anyways.
I mean, it's interesting. Like in the last few minutes, Tim, like, often a business has to go all in on a thesis. And here this thesis is like, this is a universally useful thing for
Yeah.
kids between 4 and 8. And there's,
Yeah.
I don't know how many kids between 4 and 20, 30 million. I don't
But
know, a lot.
25 million children ages 3 to
Right.
8 in the United
There we
States.
go.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot. And
Yeah.
so it's like, well, how do I get to 30 million as quickly
Yeah.
as I can? And that's kind of the way to think about things. And
Yeah.
and often one of the things is underappreciated in venture is venture very much appreciates the idea of milestones. Your dude who you raised 250 from is now you will go back to him ostensibly at some point, or someone like him, and be like, when we spoke, we had 12,000 families that were using Super
Yeah.
Teacher. Now we are at 150,000. They're like, that's a milestone.
Yeah.
You're like, exactly. Now the next phase is this.
Yeah.
And so, how do you think about your mission in terms of milestone to
Yeah.
milestone?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the thing you said right before of, there's all these kids and how are you going to reach them all? I think one big pattern in ed tech is that companies start out doing like a direct to consumer product similar to what we do. And then at some point they start experimenting with selling to schools and districts, which is a completely different go-to-market, motion, and with notoriously long sales cycles and, difficult to get revenue. But once a school district, adopts a product, they often use it for many years. So it can be good if you can make it work. And we have started to get a little bit of inbound interest from schools and districts. And that's another thing that we're going to be experimenting with over the next couple of years is making Super Teacher available on a district by district basis through like a sales channel to schools, where the value proposition to the school is like, or to the district is like, hey, I can get every kid in your district access to tutoring in every subject available 24/7, and it's $10 per student per month. And do you want to, pay for that? Rationally, the answer should be like, of course, this is great. We're going to level the education playing field within our district, because today only the wealthy people in our district are able to, procure tutoring for their kids. And this is going to be great for our local test scores. It's going to make our schools and district look better. We'll see if that works. We've gotten some inbound interest simply for the reason that, like, when you have, 12,000 parents who have subscribed to Super Teacher, some of those parents work in schools as teachers or as district leaders. And so we'll see if that's an effective way to reach more kids. It's definitely, we wouldn't be the first ed tech company that starts off with direct to consumer and then ends up doing sort of like bulk sales to schools and districts. And that's the way to ultimately reach in the United States. If you want to reach 25 million students, you're going to have to be going through the schools, because the vast majority of the parents just aren't going to be in the market for that. I mean, maybe one day we can kind of change the culture around that. Today, everyone will have that subscription to Disney Plus, but they're not really thinking about like, I also pay $10 a month for like an AI tutor for my children. Might be different in other countries where individual parents kind of taking responsibility and paying for stuff outside of the schools is more the norm.
Well, that's great. Do you guys want to end it on that note? Anything else?
That's a great spot to pause. Tim, as I think about this, I'm like, not whether or not educating is you're going to be able to do it till you're 65. Of course you will.
Yeah.
That is obvious to me. The question now is whether you can deal with the education industry until you're 65.
Yeah. It's that's we're about to find out. I mean, we'll see. Our direct to consumer motion is pretty successful. We've got pretty good unit economics. The real question is like, how fast can that actually scale? And what scale can we get? Where does that end up capping out? I do think we'll be in dealing with the education industry, as you called it, or the sector is the way they like to talk about it. And in the few interactions I've had, you run into things that you're not expecting. Like, I was talking to someone recently, and pretty much they had a bias that, you know, schools and districts shouldn't really be buying from for-profit companies in the private sector.
Hmm.
And they're, that sounds great in theory. I actually have a lot of respect for that kind of like inclination in a sense. However, I think that experience will show that buying software from nonprofit software companies is not a great system. My wife just told me, like, this morning she got an email from New York City public school system that they're going to be getting off of Google Classroom and onto something else. I don't know what it is that they're changing. I don't know why they got off of Google Classroom, but my fear is that there's like actually some, like buying committee that has decided, you know what, you shouldn't be using
Hmm.
Google Classroom because it's a for-profit company. And you can almost guarantee that whatever they get instead of Google Classroom, if it's made by like a nonprofit software company, is not actually going to function as well. And so you will, in just a little bit of kind of exposure to
Hmm.
procurement from the educational sector,
Right.
I run into some kind of like gobsmacker, you know? And,
Right.
it's it will be interesting. But I do feel like maybe this is a good note to end it on. That's what's so nice about having a mission,
Hmm.
is that that's going to be tough, and long sales cycles are going to be tough, and dealing with compliance is going to be tough and not the most inspirational work that we'll have ever done. But we know that it's in fulfillment of a good mission. And of
Right.
course, you people who, have been at mission oriented companies know that the mission thing is really real. And, you know, hopefully we'll be able to get through it no matter how hard it is. I know that no matter how hard it ends up being to try to work with schools, I will end up, trying to
Right.
go the distance, because it's really great. I mean, back to the guy in Silicon Valley, that early Googler, how cool would it be if we're educating 1 billion people, right? Like, imagine that there's actually 2 billion children worldwide, ages up to 18. Like, imagine every child has access to a private tutor 24/7, every subject, every country, every language, even every teaching methodology. Like, it's really, really amazing to think that could
Hmm.
happen. And yeah, that's I'm pretty sure it's going to get me through the tough times. Hopefully we can make it work, getting on a path to financial sustainability. But
Right. Right. Awesome mission. I love it. I'm definitely gonna download it and try it out on our 6-year-old. Let's end it there. Well, thanks so much, Tim, for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will catch you next time. See you, everybody.